Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this learning experience brought to you by AWS and nClouds. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning, where we have another exciting program ahead. Before we get that ball rolling, I do have just a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to review with you. First off, today's session is being recorded. So if you miss any of our discussion, if you'd like to rewatch, or if you'd like to share with your team, you will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand shortly after we conclude this live session today. Now, if you'd like to engage with us, there are a couple of options to do so. The first and the easiest option is that chat tab. So if you see the chat tab on the right side of the screen, I'd like you to go ahead and test that out by letting us know from where in the world you are joining us. If you have any specific questions for our panelists today, we do want you to send those questions to the Q&A tab. Sending your questions to the Q&A just helps us keep track, and we want to be able to address as many questions as we can today. So feel free to send them in as soon as you have them. Additionally, if you click that Handouts tab, you'll see there is not only a version of these slides that are available for download, but there is a copy of the Pulse Meter report itself, which these slides will reference. So feel free to grab that Pulse Meter report. And before we close things out today, we're hosting a giveaway for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So be sure to stick around to see if you're one of our lucky winners. So our topic today is best practices for successful application modernization. And I'm joined by Faisal Afzal, solution architect at nClouds, Maria Armstrong, North America go-to-market partner leader for application modernization at AWS. And leading our conversation is Mike Rothman, Chief Strategy Officer here at Techstrong Group and GM of Techstrong Research. So Maria, Faisal, and Mike, thank you all so much for joining us on Techstrong Learning. Mike, do you want to dive us right into this report?
I will. Thank you, Cody, as always, doing a wonderful job running all of the machinery that allows Techstrong Learning to do its thing. So we are thankful for Cody being here. We're thankful for our gift cards. I know many of you stick around, to not just hear the pithy and impactful discussion that we're going to have, but because you're hoping that you'll be one of the 4 that wins your awards. As Cody introduced me, I'm Mike Rothman. I run Techstrong Research, and we are going to dig into what is an increasingly both interesting and critical topic for folks, and that's the idea of application modernization. And what is that? Well, I'll have our panelists go into that quite a bit in a minute, but what we're going to do is we're going to cover a survey that we did, or a poll of the Techstrong audience. We packaged that up in a little infographic that we call the Pulse Meter. As Cody had mentioned, that is in the handout section, so you can get that with all of our insightful commentary around the data. But we are going to dig in to each one of the data points and really get a sense of what's real, what's not real, and how to interpret that within your day-to-day existence and responsibilities. Now, why is application modernization important? Well, that's because we've got all these new things and toys and capabilities and platforms that really enable us to do things that we couldn't do before, right? Whether it's elasticity, whether it's broad access, whether it's, again, self-service, there's a lot of things about a modern application platform that give us capabilities that we just didn't have. So now many organizations are undergoing this sometimes gradual, sometimes not so gradual, point to really kind of either refactor or in some cases totally rebuild their applications to be much more cloud friendly or new platform friendly. So with that, we've enlisted a number of great panelists, Faisal and Maria. Welcome to Techstrong Learning. How are you guys doing today?
Great. Thank you. I still can't help but notice Faisal's drums in the back. Like, I'm just waiting for him to break out into like an I Love App Modernization song.
That's right. There's got to be something like that. And you don't even need music, right? It's just the percussion of getting the modernization done. So Faisal, you're doing good today?
Glad to be here. Looking forward to this conversation. Yes.
You bet. Awesome. So as I kind of mentioned, right, we have these data points, kind of the survey that we did. And we really started with kind of I don't want to call it a softball, right? But a good question to really kind of set the stage for the discussion. And we asked our audience, how many of your existing cloud-based applications will be modernized over the next 24 months, right? So how many of these applications are going to undergo some kind of modernization effort? 11% said none. Okay, that's interesting, right? 24%, 1 to 25%. So we're getting a little bit of percentage, kind of mismatch here. So 24% of the audience said they would be modernizing 1 to 25% of their applications, just to make sure everybody's clear on that. 22% said 26 to 50%, 43%, which was almost double the other kind of selections, were more than 50%. So clearly application modernization is a thing, right? 50, almost 40%, over 40% said they are going to modernize more than half of their applications, which I suspect keeps you pretty busy, Faisal, right? So why don't you explain a little bit about what you do every day? Because I think that's a great way to introduce, this concept of what's involved in modernizing applications.
Right. Yeah. So thank you for the opportunity. Yes. So we at nClouds are right in the middle of this app modernization journey that many of our clients are either thinking about, have started, or are deep into it. So our objective, really in the context of app modernization, is to really start the conversation from a business outcome perspective. No two businesses are the same. They're different industries. They have different reasons for this modernization journey. Some have a clock ticking where they have to get out of the data center. Others, they see their market evolving, especially in the context of healthcare, where we've got quite a few clients that are working towards patient experience, right? How do you improve patient experience? So that requires you to go to the market faster. Are you ready for that? Can you scale? Can you adjust those DevOps patterns, things like that? So again, no two customers are the same. When I look at this chart, and I go back to how at nClouds we are helping our customers, I think the reality is it's somewhere between 20 to 30% of the applications that may be really targeted towards an app modernization and move to the cloud. And more specifically, the modernization means different things to different clients, right? And in some cases, client may want to start with a mostly lift and shift process to the cloud, but they do have a hint of modernization in picture. So for example, they may want to re-platform their database, right? They don't have support for that. In other cases, it could be, combination of database messaging, but again, no two customers are the same. And I would caution the side of, I think the first 24 months, it's a pretty tough ask to migrate more than 50% of the application because it takes time and opportunity to start the journey and evolve into those patterns.
Yeah, you bet. So Maria, your role is a little bit broader. Obviously, you work for AWS. So can you explain to us, kind of what you do? I know you work very closely with nClouds and a number of other service providers that, help customers navigate this journey. So when you kind of see the data there, again, agree, disagree, and again, you're looking at it from a little bit more of a macro standpoint than what Faisal's going to be seeing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, Faisal made a great point, right? Every customer is at a different place right now. Not every application is exactly the same. Like folks, depending on their vertical, are just going to be at a different point in time right now. But when I look at these results and I see that 11% say none, and that 24% say 1 to 25% of my applications over the next years, it makes me really question, where is that coming from? Like, why are they saying none? And why are they saying only like 1 to 25%? Is that because the term application modernization is such a big term and there's so many different paths that you could take to modernize your application that folks are maybe paralyzed with, where do I actually get started? What is that business case that I have internally that I could raise up to the executives within my organization to say, hey, if we actually modernized our applications, we could potentially overcome and solve for this business problem that we're experiencing as an organization. Like, for example, Faisal, I know you do so much work with customers on modern applications. And of course, with folks being so digital right now, demands are so high, meaning that if a customer is collecting a lot of data from, let's say, like their web application or their IoT devices, they've got to make changes to their application really quickly, depending on that data that's coming in. So I would imagine, Faisal, that you probably are having a lot of customers coming to nClouds, and I might actually know this too, asking, like, Faisal, I know I need to do this, but I just don't know how to do this. And I have all this data coming in. What do I do?
Yeah. A lot of spot on, Maria. I mean, one specific customers, and maybe that's the reason you put that one forward, is around data analytics, right? So they have an existing ecosystem of application, which is, I guess, doing as good as it can, collecting that data. But what do you do with it? Again, I'm going to go back to healthcare, and they've got like north of 5 terabytes of data, and it's just growing at scale at this point. How do you take that and how do you utilize those services in AWS, right, to make sense of it? So I think modernization can start anywhere in the ecosystem, and oftentimes what we're seeing, especially with data analytics, is companies wanting to carve out that expertise in the cloud by taking these this data point and leveraging AWS specific services, whether it's SageMaker, whether it's from data warehousing solutions, right, to kind of stitch together and put together a piece and show that value. I want to quickly deviate towards a question that participant 783 brought up about how can organizations effectively assess their existing applications to determine which ones are suitable for modernization. Great question. Again, it's all starts back to the business outcome, business objective. What you're trying to accomplish? But then once you have settled down on one or two verticals from the business areas, it really comes down to complexity, dependencies, right? I mean, if you've got an old language, it's got a lot of libraries, it's got a lot of integration points, lines of codes. Is it integrating with messaging? Is there an API layer in the middle? A lot of these kind of, factor into the conversation about, how do you effectively assess and then find that right candidate to move to the cloud? Oftentimes, and Maria, I'm going to be looking at you to chime in as well. I think we look for that low-hanging fruit, for lack of better words, to say, what is it that we can show a benefit as an organization, as a company, and also show business value, and you take that and then you adjust the journey around it. And because there are a lot of things going on upstream and downstream. Sure, you're leveraging AWS for compute, storage, networking, all these pieces that you have to worry about and kind of from a CapEx perspective, and you no longer have to. But just because you move to an OpEx model does not make the application modernization and downstream journey easier. So going back to that question, I would say, start with where's the best business value in terms of your existing application. Then start looking at the complexity of the application. You want to pick something that you can take to the cloud, and not just take to the cloud, but make it cloud native, because being in the cloud and cloud native are two different things. And then if you take a small application, you can show the value, you can show that scale, and you can also address changing processes, patterns, and behaviors, right, that are needed for a cloud journey to be successful. I want to close out by saying one additional thing on this question. We work with a lot of clients at nClouds, and oftentimes what we find out is there are long, drawn-out cloud journeys that may have taken 1, 2, 3, even more in terms of millions of dollars worth of effort, and there's very little value to show. So it's very important to find that right, that right application.
So what you said was really focus on quick wins, right? And, kind of find, a set of applications that can provide some quick wins. And then Maria will get you to weigh in on these things. The other thing that I think is important from a framing standpoint, and that hits on, a point that you made, Faisal, which is, it's a stretch, right? To think over 2 years, you're going to modernize, 50% of your applications. And I would agree with that. If you're starting from a standing stop, right, today, the idea that you'll get 50% of your applications, unless you have like 5 applications, right, done over the next 2 years may be a little bit of a stretch. But, the way I've kind of worked with a number of clients in terms of, again, kind of framing this idea is building that, in effect, toolkit in order to, really start to do modernization. So the first one is absolutely brutal, right? Because you don't know what you're doing, right? And yeah, you can work with folks like nClouds, and you can engage with all sorts of folks on the AWS side and wherever, to get you done. But you have no idea what you're doing. You kind of don't know what's right. You don't know what you don't know at that point. And that's a struggle. Right. The second one you'd hope would be a little easier, right? The third one a little bit easier there. And you start to develop tools. You start to develop playbooks. You start to develop, in effect, components that you can use in order to, kind of facilitate that modernization effort. So if you're doing applications 15, 20, 25, and you're starting from scratch every time, you're doing something wrong. I mean, you just don't understand, this kind of thing. So again, I think that what we like to see is this idea of you being able to accelerate your modernization efforts as you go on, because you get smarter and more proficient at what you're doing. So I know both of you folks have, worked with customers that have done a number of these things. So do you see them learning from that standpoint? Do you see them embracing, kind of more leverage mechanisms to really facilitate their modernization efforts?
I love that we're shaking our head just in response to yes, like absolutely to everything that you're saying. And it really is about picking that first MVP application. And to your point, like really digging in and understanding exactly how to modernize that application and what do the processes look like to get that application to a modernized state. What are the people or processes internally at your organization that potentially need to change to support that modern application? And once you have that first MVP app that's been modernized, to your point, you have a processes. You've now seen it. You've now gone through it. It's not as daunting. And you have the correct people and the correct processes internally at your organization to support that modern application. So now you've kind of created that mechanism or that factory to be able to do it again. Now, obviously, not every application is the same. We've said that so many times, and I can't say that enough. Not every application is going to be modernized in the same way. And I think when you're looking at these survey results, I think it's important that when we say modernization, it doesn't necessarily mean taking that big, clunky, monolithic application and refactoring it into microservices and putting it on AWS and containers or making it be cloud native. It could be that old legacy application, that it's not beneficial to the organization to modernize it any further, and that we need to take a look at building a brand new application to support what those current needs are. So I just think it's important. I can't stress it enough. No application is the same. No path to modernization is exactly the same. But start small. Start with the MVP app. Get a great partner like nClouds involved in conjunction with AWS to go through that process with you and enable you along the way.
So
spot on.
Go ahead, Faisal.
I was just going to add that, and I know that Maria and I are in the same ecosystem where we're talking to architects, the CTOs, and leadership. And I think it all comes down to how do you ensure that the organization is ready, right? So you got to have a great champion at a leadership level, right? 2, you have to be able to identify how does it, aligns with the business outcome, right? As I said before. And 3rd, who are going to be your downstream champions who are going to help you? Parchment 393 talks about, hey, what if there was no cloud? Would there still be a need to modernize applications? Absolutely, yes. In fact, another persona that we don't often factor into our conversation and don't talk about is when we walk into a dev shop that is really disciplined, and they actually have already microserviced their application portfolio. And when we start talking about cloud, the first response is, well, we're already there. We're containerized, we're microservice. We need to be more mindful of that cloud journey and what's that going to add to the complexity. So there's one side of it that Maria talked about, right? And then on the other side, we also see a lot of talent. And when we're dealing with customers where they're like, we have the discipline. we've got it all microservice. Talk to us, what are the challenges that will come when we actually start to migrate this to the cloud?
Right. So one of the things, because I'm, not as young as I used to be, and I forget things. So one of the things we talked about earlier between the three of us was kind of the qualification process for an organization, like nClouds. And Maria, you mentioned a program that you guys have at AWS to really identify, kind of the cream of the crop of, organization. So again, when the folks out there are considering who it is that they should work with to help structure, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means later on, but could you just explain, what that qualification process is briefly? Because to me, it was pretty impressive, and I think it is pretty pertinent to a lot of the discussion that we've had thus far.
Ah, yes, you're making us think back to that really candid conversation that we have. I love how you do that to us. This is a plug, Faisal. This is a plug for nClouds right now. I've got to be honest, because AWS has a process which is called our Monox Bootcamp, which really walks our customers today through the different modernization pathways in really helping our customers to identify which pathway is most important for them to get started, and then helping them to pick that MVP application, and then working with them over a period of 6 to 8 weeks to show them how to modernize that application, and then allowing them to watch as we're going through that process and helping them to ensure that they have the correct processes in place to support that modern application. And then hoping that we've given them tools to the kingdom that after this one MVP app, they can continue to do it moving forward. Well, this Monox framework is a framework that's only been opened up from an AWS perspective to a very small handful of partners. And when I say small, like 5 partners in all of North America. And nClouds is really one of them that raised their hands to be a part of this process. I'm sorry, that's why I said this is a little plug for you. And I know this isn't supposed to be a commercial, but I've got to do it. And they really put their resources on it to understand this process, to be able to deliver these Monox engagements directly with their customers, or in some cases on behalf of AWS. Just because as a group, as a true partnership, AWS and nClouds really believes in this methodology to help our customers move along their journeys.
Yeah, you bet. And again, I didn't do that, to kind of plug nClouds, right? I did that to establish the credibility of both of you in terms of you've been there, you've done that, you've worked with dozens, if not hundreds of customers that have gone through this process. So, when we talk about best practices for modernization, it's not like we're pulling stuff out of thin air, right? We're talking to folks who have done this, a number of times. So let's move on to the next, I could literally talk about that all day. And then we have a whole bunch of other data and bar charts that we wouldn't get to. And if I don't get my bar charts in, I'm not happy, guys. So we're going to get our bar charts in. Second question was, rank your top priorities for the cloud for the remainder of 2023. And this is a composite score. So it wasn't like we had 1,500 people, kind of select one of these things. So it's a weighted score, and folks kind of picked in rack and stack format, right? Modernize applications and then migrate additional workloads to the cloud, right? Improve DevOps performance was third. Ensure cloud workloads are sufficiently secured, make your cloud implementations more cost efficient, and operate and monitor the cloud environment more effectively. What's interesting, and again, sometimes these things can be a little bit self-selecting. We, kind of searched out audience members who were focused on modernization. So shockingly enough, modernization was the thing that was, most important to them. But, I do want to, again, pay attention to some stuff that I think, are pretty important as part of these processes. It wasn't an either or type of thing, right? It was a multi-select, type of question. So it wasn't that, it was just kind of more folks picked modernization than some of the other ones. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of why you modernize an environment is to ensure that your workloads are sufficiently secured, right? Is to make your cloud implementation more cost efficient. So these are not mutually exclusive type of data points. And in a lot of cases, if you do modernization correctly, you do have the again kind of happy benefit of having a much more secure environment, right? Having a much more cost efficient, environment if you embrace elasticity and auto scaling and a lot of the other capabilities that, again, a platform like AWS brings you. And again, it's not about me, right? But I've been working with clients on the cloud security side for the last 12 to, I guess it's a little bit over 12 years at this point. And it's really interesting when you talk to them and you kind of just say, I can build you something in the cloud that is fundamentally and significantly more secure than anything you can build in the data center. And they're like, you cannot, no way, you're not going to be able to do that. And then we get up on the whiteboard and we start talking about isolation. We start talking about, kind of locking things down with IAM. We start talking about, kind of very structured, secure microservices-based applications. And at some point, the light goes on, right? And they go, holy crap, I actually can do things that are, both more secure, more efficient, and drop my costs because I'm leveraging, again, the cloud-based consumption model on that front. So I'll get off my soapbox now. But when you kind of look at the data that we see here, right? What kind of jumps out at you besides the fact that modernization is the most important thing? So Faisal and Maria, I think your jobs are probably pretty secure, at least for the next kind of couple of months on that front. Does anything else kind of jump out at you guys from a data point standpoint?
From my perspective, when I look at this, I think there's a saying out there that everybody's got a plan till they get hit with a punch, right? And I think what happens is the cloud journeys start with a lot of excitement, and obviously the right focus in the right place. But reality is, overwhelming majority of our clients, when we start to engage with them, our first really engagement is around well-architected framework reviews, because we need to understand where they are today and how they have arrived at that point. And oftentimes cost optimization and security are not just concerns, but in reality, those actually bring up a lot of cloud sprawl, lack of security, and some of that, Mike, that you talked about, right? Like from an enforcement perspective, using guardrails, SEPs. So I think that reality is that all of our engagements start with a well-architected framework review, which AWS champion, but if you look at Azure or Google, all of them are using the same framework, the same pretty much pillars, and in addition to that, the 12-factor wrap, methodology. So I don't know, Maria, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I actually, when I look at this, I say, wow, modern applications outvoted migrate additional workloads to the cloud. I have to pause and stop for a second. I'm like, I know we're in 2023. Let me check my watch real quick. Okay, we're in 2023, right? If we just went back, I feel like even 3 years, that migrate additional workloads to the cloud would have been at the top, and that modern applications would have been like maybe the second or third as a result of this survey. Which obviously, this is great to see these survey results. These are exciting to me because I think from an AWS perspective, our conversation with customers was always migrate to modernize, move to the cloud, step one, then modernize. That was always the conversation track, but we've really shifted as we see the market needs shifting and our needs for our customers to adopt, to say, now you need to be thinking about migrating and modernizing at the same time. And it's just amazing for me to see that that message is resonating out there with other folks as well, and that they're thinking about this as their organizations, where no longer is it just a goal to just get to the cloud, but the goal is to really understand how to actually truly consume the benefits of being in the cloud and be more modern, and really allow your applications to take advantage of that. So this is great for me to say.
Yeah, you bet. And to, again, kind of highlight that point, Maria, I think it's important to remember that, again, whether it was 3, 5, 7 years ago, there was pressure to go to the cloud. And you're just like, well, why are we going to the cloud? Because we're going to the cloud. So it was like a shiny thing to do, and folks, wanted to go and do that, and that was great, right? I mean, listen, that got a whole bunch of this thing started, but Faisal, you were talking about the importance of the business outcome discussion when you start any specific modernization effort, and I think that's what that data is reflecting, right? It's not about just moving to the cloud anymore. It's really about what is it and why is it that we're modernizing, and really kind of having a distilled business justification for what that investment is going to require. Because again, depending on what you're doing, right, it can be non-trivial, it can be pretty significant, and there is risk there, depending on how well you execute on that front. So you do have to make sure that you've got your ducks in a row on that front. We did have an interesting, kind of question in the chat that, and again, this kind of hits Maria on a point that you made before, right? So if not all applications are the same, do they have enough things in common so that you can build some common modernization patterns that can be defined and reused, right? So you use it. Just remember, everything is, different, and it's in a different path. And I sat there and said, if you're not getting leverage, you're doing it wrong, right? So there's got to be some, kind of I think we're both, kind of right in that standpoint. But obviously, kind of with some framing involved. So, could you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, it depends on where do you want to go as a customer, right? What is your end state? Are you looking to build that cloud native application consuming serverless services? Are you looking to build containerized applications? Are you a healthcare customer? Are you a finance customer? What is your business challenge that you're solving for? Are you solving for data streaming? What is it that you're solving for? And if we can really hone in on your industry, what the business problem is that you're solving for, your ideal state of where you want to be, if that's serverless right out of the gate, or if that's containers to start, we can start to pull in technical architectural patterns that we've seen work in the past as guidance for us to be able to build upon those technical architecture patterns to help you with modernizing your application. So yes, not every single application is exactly the same, and we want to make sure we say that over and over again, so we don't say choose A, B, or C to modernize your applications. But there are technical architecture patterns that do exist depending on your industry, depending on, to Faisal's point, your business outcome or your use case that you're trying to solve for, and what industry you're in.
Yeah, and I think, and AWS has, by the way, done a great job here articulating, but all these various services that AWS offers, and other cloud service providers for that matter, they properly fit into the industry's trends. So, for example, talk about healthcare, right? From a business perspective, you've got staffing challenges, you got digital products that need to go to the market faster, you've got cybersecurity issues like Mike you talked about, you've got data that you need to make sense of to improve patient care, right? And so on and so forth, right? So for every use case, for every industry, there are defined trends or challenges, and AWS, for that matter, as well as the application modernization in the context of the cloud journey, it fits in really nicely.
So as we kind of move to our next, chart and question that we asked, I'll kind of preface it with this idea that, when you talk to, a whole bunch of people, and you'll see these, kind of psychologists that go and do these, surveys on campuses and other places. And they'll ask, kind of folks, how competent are you, or how good are you at a certain thing, right? And the numbers always come back that 80% of the people think they're in the top quarter of all performers. Right? And you're just like, well, I'm not too good at math, but if 80% of the people say they're in the top quarter, there's something funky about, the math, or really more importantly, people's perceptions of, kind of their own ability to do things. So the next thing that we asked was, how comfortable are you with your internal capabilities in the following areas of, cloud computing? Right. And it ranged from very comfortable to very uncomfortable from that standpoint. But, I've worked with a lot of these clients, and obviously you never know who I filled out the poll, but I've worked with, again, probably 100 different environments there. And yeah, they definitely feel like they're a lot more comfortable than when you sit there and look at their architecture and go, really? That's how you decided to build that thing. So we do see a little bit of this, but what you do see is, I think folks are more comfortable on the cloud architecture side with a total of almost 54%, kind of being at least comfortable. They're least comfortable with cloud cost management, which I think was pretty interesting. And it's not like we're going through a slowdown or anything, and folks are really starting to scrutinize what folks actually, are spending stuff on. And the rest of the things are built in, right? More comfortable with DevOps than they are with containers and Kubernetes, right? Less comfortable, or almost the same comfortable with security as they are with networking, but less than architecture. So I always kind of get a kick out of these kind of questions, because one, I do think that there's some inflation going on there. But two, if you look at it just from a trending standpoint, right, we've been doing cloud stuff for, again, close to 15 years at this point, right? We've been doing DevOps for close to 12 or, 10 to 12, right? So I think it's not, and it shouldn't be surprising that folks feel most comfortable with, kind of architecture and DevOps, because we've been doing that, right, for the longest amount of time. When things were great, right, folks didn't really care about the cost. Like, oh, whatever, right? We're not having to buy a new data center, so whatever we're going to pay in cloud cost, that's fine. And then they have thousands of SaaS applications and a whole mess of usage out of every cloud platform, because they've got to be multi-cloud. I don't know why, but they just seem to need to be on that front. So again, what do you guys see? Is this consistent with the discussions you're having with folks that may think they're a little bit more capable than they are, in fact?
Yeah, I can go first. Again, as I mentioned before, in terms of capabilities, you're spot on, where people feel much more comfortable with the architecture. But then the reality meets you about a year or two down into the journey, and you realize that, wait a minute, I think we could have spent a bit more time and opportunity around well-architected framework review in the context of security and cost optimization pillar, right? So this is a pretty good representation of where people feel they are, and where they definitely lack a little bit of comfort. I would say, though, that no two industries are the same. No two organizations obviously are the same. But with certain industries, with their more focus on, let's say, security or HIPAA compliance or PHI, may feel that they are more stronger in security. And oftentimes, you see that trend. But then other customers who are new to the market, have only been on their cloud or cloud native journey for a few years and are still growing, they actually find challenges all across the board, from architecture, from security, networking, and oftentimes a lot of our customers that we work with, one of the things that we do after the well-architected framework review is to kind of position them towards looking at utilizing, say, control tower, right, account factory, build the foundational layer, maybe centralized management of networking resources, and maybe even have a different view, especially coming from a traditional, on-prem data center, F5 meets, other appliances, to say, is a flat subnet structure really that bad if AWS provides you the ability to keep your workload safe and secure?
Yeah, I think for me too, looking at the results from a containers and Kubernetes perspective, I am not shocked by the fact that on that line, 33% of folks said that they are comfortable with containers and Kubernetes. Even more so, what's interesting, even more so than cloud cost management, that piece is interesting to me. But the containers and Kubernetes piece with 33% feeling comfortable, I would have been more shocked if it was folks that were very uncomfortable in that space. So I think from a Kubernetes perspective in the market, there's been such a buzz about Kubernetes that I almost feel to the point that when folks think about application modernization and they think about modernizing their apps, they immediately think of Kubernetes. And we've actually had a lot of folks that have come forward to us and have said, I want help in modernizing my applications and I want to start using Kubernetes. To which case the next question is always, oh, Are you using Kubernetes in some capacity already today? Are you comfortable with it? Do you understand that this is just one path to modernize your applications, and that before you start modernizing your apps, leveraging Kubernetes, you first need to understand Kubernetes. So that might not be the best path forward for you as a customer to start modernizing your applications. Yeah. So I'm not surprised by these results, but I wonder how many folks dug really deep down inside when they answered that they were comfortable.
By the way, I would add to that, Maria. That's one of the things that we see when we start engaging with clients, especially when the client size is larger. That there are people on client side that do actually feel comfortable with containers and Kubernetes. But is the rest of the organization along for the journey, right?
Absolutely.
Do they have those defined patterns around application deployment, observability, and monitoring, right? So you can have a great champion, somebody who really knows the technology, are very passionate about containers and Kubernetes, and are bent on standing up their Prometheus and Grafana infrastructure when that's not the business. That's not the business this organization is in, right? If you're in the healthcare business, the last thing you want to do is worry about your Prometheus and Grafana, right, implementation. So oftentimes, even if you're going to containers and you start to leverage, AWS-centric EKS or ECS, the reality is that perhaps a more, deeper look at an agnostic solution, like maybe Datadog, maybe something else might be part of the picture. So I do believe that this should be taken with a grain of salt, where I think certain individuals within an organization feel very confident, and rightfully so. But that doesn't mean that in order for this to be a successful app modernization journey, if everybody else is along for the journey and understand and agree.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think it would have been interesting to see what those results would have been if we had had the opportunity to break them out and it had containers as that separate line and Kubernetes as that.
Yeah, people conflate, both of them.
As a second line.
I do want to, kind of, again, another person put in the chat, what are these best practices? Our, event is called best practices, and we've been alluding to them, but I think we can be a little bit more specific, right? And again, it highlights that point you just made, Maria, which is first and foremost, you got to understand the business reason and have a specific business outcome for what it is that you're doing, right? Hey, I want to modernize my applications, and the answer is Kubernetes. Well, what's the question? I don't care, right? The answer is Kubernetes. And you run into a whole mess of that. So, first and foremost, I think, we kind of talked about the importance of having that business discussion, having a business justification for any of these efforts, right? We talked about the importance of a well-architected, framework, not just a review, but really building a foundation in order to make sure that you've got that, again, robust environment to build and platform these modernized applications on that front. We talked about, again, toolkits, right? You mentioned Control Tower, you mentioned Account Factory, Faisal, and those are key mechanisms to help customers gain leverage and efficiency in how they deploy new environments, to support new applications once you get to scale and you want to start rolling out things a lot faster. So you want to think about what kind of tool, sets and tool chains you have in place in order to, again, provide that. We mentioned patterns and the importance of having a variety of different patterns that are acceptable in the organization, again, through the crucible of experience, right? You do a data application, you have a data pattern, right? You do an analytics, you have an analytics. You do a customer-facing thing, you have a customer-facing pattern for some of those modules. Were there other things that we discussed already that I missed on that front, or that was a decent summary?
I think that's a good summary. And I want to just quickly go back to the best practice for the successful app modernization. And some of these we touched on already, right? Like tying them with the business outcome, right? What is the business objective? Where are you going to find the benefit if you move this application? Will this allow you to continue to grow into a market or a sector, right? And then we kind of talked about it, having the right partner, right? So for example, whether you have an nCloud or you have another partner, I think you need one, especially if you have very limited knowledge, understanding, or experience in cloud native and deployment patterns, then you definitely need to look at addressing that gap with a strategic partner, right? And then when you are together with this partner, that's when you start to really do a SWOT analysis, which is in our case, like strength, weaknesses, from a technology perspective. Like you have to figure out who is that leader in the organization, who is that champion from a technology perspective, who is going to help you along this journey route, right? And then as you continue moving forward, your gap analysis, and these are part of our conversation that we're having, like benchmarking, like what are some of the internal capabilities you're trying to improve? What are you trying to accomplish from an industry perspective, right? Where do you want to be? How competitive do you need to be, right? And the list just goes on and on. But just to kind of close it, I would say that, that's the next step really is looking at the assessment of your existing hardware and software stack and understanding, again, what is that low-hanging fruit? Because when you talk about best practices, you can't contribute to those best practices by pulling in every single application from every single business vertical. You got to start small with 1 or 2 applications.
Yep. Can't boil the ocean, as they say, yeah. Right? So that was a great segue, Faisal, to kind of the next data point, which and the next 2 really deal with service providers, because what I found is, again, sometimes folks think they know more than they actually know, and they can get into some deep water. But more importantly, I think that there are folks that have done this before. When I was having this discussion with people 10, 12 years ago, right, there weren't a lot of folks that had done this before. So we were all kind of figuring it out. We were just trying to see what worked, what didn't work. And then, each of the cloud platforms would roll out these new services, and, you'd have cool stuff like, again, Lambda is a great example of that, and even ECS and then EKS, Fargate, right? Kind of services that you could use to build out these applications for a lot of things that you had to do manually before. Right. So that really, kind of helped facilitate things. But ultimately, there are companies that have done this before. Right. There are people who have done this before. And as you're embarking on this journey, again, we asked folks, what do you consider, cloud service companies that help organizations build and manage modern infrastructure solutions? And again, I guess not shocking, but somewhat gratifying. 50% of the folks there kind of consider them strategic and trusted partners, right? So it's not a matter of I need to just do this. I don't have the people. There's staff augmentation, right? That was 18%. They're tactical, right? That's 19%. They can help me with ongoing support. And all of those are true. But when you really start thinking about embarking on this journey, I would, again, just highlight the importance of not having to learn everything the hard way. Right. I don't know if you guys have kids. I have, to my wife and I, we have 5 kids, and we've seen over and over again the fact that they have to learn things the hard way. Hopefully everybody out there doesn't have to, have those painful experiences to, finally learn something, and you can actually rely on an organization that has done this before. So, Faisal, when you're sitting down with customers, you're at the solution architect level. Again, I gotta believe that when you sit with them, they're asking you, to again be this strategic, perspective and bring a ton of experience to what can help those folks do things more effectively and more efficiently. Tell me that's the case, right? Don't disappoint.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think early on in the conversation, and I was asking Maria to also confirm and validate, but as a solution architect, my real job is to put together an architecture, right, that allows them that transformation journey, that path. But oftentimes the conversations start at a CTO level, at a architect level, to say, hey, can I provide you that strategic assistance, right? That be that trusted partner that you are looking for. And this is true not just for cloud, but also for containers, right? Whether you use AWS, which is, by the way, the market leader when it comes to Kubernetes managed service provider, but whether you work with VMware or their Tanzu product, whether you work with Red Hat on their OpenShift platform, that strategic trusted partner, tie-in is so important. And that's where we spend a lot of time. Once you have that buy-in, once you have that trust, once that strategy is clear, it becomes much more easier to kind of help lead that journey and transformation, right, Maria?
Absolutely. It's kind of it's kind of interesting to think that anybody would try to tackle it any other way than that. That was that question on best practices. Like if we went back to that, I summarized it with like 3 little words when we were all talking. I was like, align your business leaders, align your developers, and align your operators. Like make sure everybody is aligned on whatever the business use case or challenges that we're solving for. And everybody is on board with the solution that's being designed too. Because I bet, Faisal, you've run into this, I bet, a bunch of times with customers where you might have like an executive that comes to you and they're really excited and they want to push modernization in the organization. And they have this idea of, if I build this platform, they will use it without consulting anybody in the organization.
You know that the saying is, you build and they'll come. And I will use a personal experience from healthcare where I built and not very many people came, right? So that's and it's humbling, right? But it's okay to take that and say, here's a lesson learned, right? And that was, by the way, in the context of Kubernetes and containers, right? What I would say is some of the challenges are not overly just simplified or are just taken care of by having that strategic conversation at a leadership level. You often have to start looking at what's in it for me for other players in an organization, especially in a larger organization where you've got a chief security officer and his job is on the line, right? If you implement this cloud transformation journey and there's a hole, right? Whether you miss a guardrail or SCP or something happens, right? So Maria's spot on. It doesn't stop at a CTO level. You got to start looking at the chief security officer. You got to understand their concerns. You got to understand the development team concern. Well, we can't get to the market because the engineering team has not been able to. Maybe the engineering team is pulled back because of the CapEx model, right? They have not been able to scale. Maybe there are issues around automation and DevOps, right? So all these personas from enterprise architecture, right? What we deliver, does it meet the architecture review board? Like what is their view of the enterprise architecture? So that's just the beginning. Oftentimes the first call, the first conversation is just the beginning of a lot of those conversations and relationships that we have to build to solidify a solution that will be bought by everybody within the organization and also bring the value.
You bet. So as we kind of wrap up the data, and I do want there's one kind of comment that was put into the chat that I do want to address because I think it's important. So for the following areas, how likely are you to engage with a service provider to assist in migrating to the cloud? Again, highlighting, a lot of what we already said. Cloud architecture and design, top one, ongoing monitoring and management. Again, that's probably second, right? Build and implementation, and then prototyping would be, kind of behind on that front. And again, the good news is, I think that, when you even think about from a neutral standpoint, you just have maybe a quarter of the folks for each one of these that are unlikely or very unlikely to use a service provider. And again, I think that's just, it goes to show that the Techstrong audience is a little bit more intelligent than your basic, kind of, I'm just kidding. But, they understand, there's stuff that they don't know and that there are people that can help them with. But I do want to spend the last couple of minutes before we give it back to Cody and let him give away our gift cards, because I know folks are sitting there like, give away the gift cards already, man. I want my gift card. One point in there was, are there examples of successful app modernizations and what made them successful? Obviously, we could have done the whole hour talk on that. Right. So we don't have a lot of time, but if one or both of you could just, really briefly highlight a successful modernization, I think that's a great way to, kind of wrap things up.
Sure.
Go ahead,
Maria.
You want me to give some principles? If we go back to our principles, and then you could fill it in with an actual example of a customer scenario. But I think it goes back to those that have been successful have been where we really involve everyone across the organization and we really involve all the stakeholders. And before starting on a project, we've clearly outlined exactly what that business problem or challenge is for the organization. And we've also discussed what happens if we don't do this. What does the organization face at that point? And we've taken the time to go through all of the different stakeholders and understand from them what's important to them and what they need. And we take all of that into the solution that's designed. But before we just walk away and hand somebody a solution, We're really making sure that they've got the correct people, processes, and the ability to consume the technology within the organization. And that is a recipe for success. But Faisal, please share a real life, as real life as an example as you can.
Without violating any NDAs. We don't want
Exactly.
Again, no two organizations are the same. Sizes are kind of bring different results. But I would say, and borrowing from Amazon's leadership principle, bias for action at the leadership level, at an architecture level, engineering, and development level. When you see that even though there's a disconnect, and oftentimes there's a difference of opinion on how to do certain things, right? Where we see that the leadership pulls in the right set of people who are really good at what they do, but then they also have a bias for action where they will commit at some point and say, okay, I do not agree with this. However, I'm going to move forward with this plan of action. I think those are the ones where we really are successful. On the other side of it, where we are working with smaller and medium-sized businesses, it's a different type of an issue, right? It's a different type of challenge when it comes to being successful. They may not need your architecture expertise to that extent, but where they may need your help in, migrating some of the leftover applications, right? So the journeys are different, but from a successful, case of modernization effort, I would say where there's full alignment and bias for action, because on the flip side, when people are just discussing analysis paralysis, that's where we see long, prolonged journeys where you're spending a lot of money and resources and not getting the result.
Yeah, that's great. And so somebody in there also put something called the Conveyor.io community. So that's something to take a look at. I'm not familiar with them, but that was something that the audience had come in. And then one last point that I'll make from somebody from the crowd, which I think really kind of sums things up. And they write, I found the most must-have ingredient is that leadership does not allow the organization to drag their feet or rebel against change. Right. And they bring in experts to help hold all of them accountable to the goal of modernization or migration programs. And yeah, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, we've seen the enemy, and the enemy is us in a lot of, situations where you just have internal resistance to change, to, kind of modernization. And it's just easier, when things were just, kind of simple. And I'm old enough to remember when a lot of things were just on the big iron, right? Kind of somewhere else. And you didn't really, have to worry about it. And that's not today anymore. Right. So if you're not comfortable with change, if you're not, again, in an environment where a dynamic type of situation where you've got, kind of architectures and new offerings that are evolving at just a crazy pace, if you're not comfortable with that environment, go find something else to do, because you're not going to be happy, in cloud land or in a lot of technology sectors with that. So with that, I just want to point out a couple things in the download section. Cody did mention that before, that we do have the pulse meter as well as these slides that are here. So you'll get a little bit more discussion around each one of the data points, as well as what we think is going to happen. That's the Techstrong analyst view at the end of the pulse meter. So check that out. We do have a couple of upcoming events as well. Our Digital CXO Summit, which really has everything to do with transformation. So that's if transformation and modernization is important to you, I think that'll be a great event, September 13th. You can register at that link right there, which is in the slides. And we have something called the DevOps Experience. That is in mid-October, where we really dig into, again, what is happening in DevOps, where are things going, where are folks having success. So check those things out. And with that, Mr. Cody, welcome back, and let's give out some gift cards. Wahoo!
Awesome. Thank you, Mike and Maria and Faisal. Thank you both so much for joining us today. It was such a pleasure getting to speak with you today. I would like to remind everyone that, of course, our session was recorded. You will be receiving a link via email to access the recording on demand, or you can find it living on the Cloud Native Now website at cloudnativenow.com/webinars. And be sure to look in the on-demand section. The 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing are Paula F., Timo L., Abdelmajid G., and Jennifer D. So congratulations to our 4 winners. We'll be reaching out to you shortly to get these gift cards over to you. If you don't happen to see an email, check your spam folder on the off case that it happens to be filtered out. I'd like to thank AWS and nClouds for sponsoring our program today. I'd like to thank Techstrong Research for providing the polls and insights that went into our Pulse Meter report, which last call, feel free to download that from our handout section. And my final note is to just stick around with us until we close out, because there is a survey that will pop up, and we would love to hear your thoughts, whether they be about today's program or upcoming topics. Please let us know your thoughts in that survey. We would love to hear from you.
And
regardless,
thank you to Faisal and Maria for just being fantastic panelists. So this has been great.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, happy to be a part of the day today. Thank you for having us.
Of course. Thank you, everyone. You may now disconnect.
Thank you.